Hello students, this is Mrs. Moore bringing you your lecture on America, the New Nation, Lecture 2. And today we are basically going to be talking about America's economy and different visions for what America's economy should be like. And there's some different kind of vocabulary, some different vocabulary and language I'm going to be giving you in this lecture. We know that an economy is a nation's means of making wealth, and there are a lot of factors to keep in mind as we talk about America's economy. Realize that this is a new nation, it's pretty large, and the people in the nation have different ways of making money. We talked about this a bit in the last lecture. And so there are going to be some conflicting visions that we're going to see that are going to come out here. So let's just dig in and we'll kind of learn some vocabulary of economy as well. I also want to make one thing clear to you guys, and that is it may seem a little bit dull to some of you to talk about money and how money is created and different plans for a national bank and things like that. If you don't find economics interesting, you may think, oh, this has nothing to do with me. But you should understand this, that when you determine what a nation's economy is, it affects how people live, believe it or not. And this is going to become clear to you through this lecture. So there is actually a very human element to money and how nations earn money. So let's go right ahead and dig in. All right, so last week we set the stage for the new nation. We focused on population, Washington as the first president, the presidential cabinet, some religious freedom, different things like this. Now, mainly we're going to talk about Alexander Hamilton today because he's, as you recall, the Department of Treasury head. He is in Washington's cabinet, and he is a genius. He was a genius, in some ways, maybe a bit too aggressive in his genius because it could rub people the wrong way, but he had a very clear vision of what he thought America should be like. So let's look at that. Again, I know a lot of you may know some things about Hamilton because you enjoy the musical so much, and that's great. That's really wonderful. Some facts will come out to you. Maybe you'll want to burst into song. I don't know that I will burst into song today, but you just never know with me, do you? All right. So the first thing you have to understand is after the war, after the Constitution is ratified, the government basically doesn't have any money in its treasury, and this is a problem because they have a large debt. Understand this too, a government needs to raise money in order to run and operate. This is a very fundamental thing. Your parents probably even talk about how sometimes they get emails from the fundraising office at school wanting them to donate money for our funding and operations and some extra things that the school does for you. Of course, a lot of school funding comes from tax dollars, but there are extra things, particularly with charter schools. We don't get as much money as regular schools, regular public schools. We get a portion. But the point is, any kind of organization needs money to run, all right? So let's talk about the ways governments pay their bills. I know that you hear on the news or you glance on a newspaper, you hear your parents talking about national debt, this and that, big concern about how large our debt is, leaving the debts to our children, etc. So hopefully this lecture will give you some perspective so that when your parents are having these conversations, you can listen and learn and maybe even chime in yourselves. So how do governments pay bills? Well, there are three ways. All right, first, taxing the people. We know all about that. And we also know that this is something the founders were cautious about because we know that George III overtaxed the people. And so they wanted to be sure not to be tyrannical in taxing the people. Second, government bonds. A bond is like selling stock in the government, selling a share of government, so to speak. Okay? There is a hope of return if the government is successful. Think of seed money to start a business. I know I'm throwing a lot of economic ideas out there to you, but think about if you have a wonderful idea. Wonderful idea. Let's see. A cup holder that you can wear around your neck so that you can drink all the time, and it's attractive too. I mean, drink coffee, and of course the Red Bulls you children can't get enough of. But you have this wonderful idea, and you just need to be funded so you can do advertising, get your product out there, let people know about it. And in the case of America, this is sort of how it is. You have a country that is new, promising, and yet needs some money to get going. It's a similar idea. And if you invest in America, you buy some bonds, and the country is successful, well, then you'll get money back and then some. So it's a matter of faith in a product, for the case of the cup holder around the neck, always wonderful, or a nation itself. So government bonds. The third thing you can do, number 3, you can print money. Okay, now we understand perhaps that this is dangerous, because if you just print money and there isn't any value behind it, because the new government hasn't really established credit, there isn't a gold source to back it up, you're going to end up with problems of the money having absolutely no value. And so this is not a proper solution. So this is something that needs to be thought about and fixed, as America is a young country. As I told you, the federal treasury was empty. And a solution was Madison and Hamilton. They came together. Hamilton, we know, Secretary of the Treasury, and Madison at this point, aside from being father of the Constitution, author of the Bill of Rights, he's a congressman. In 1789, they come together and propose a tariff. So a tariff, this is a tax on imports. They propose this to raise money. And their tariff is called the Tariff and Tonnage Act. All this means is that they are going to tax goods by the ton. So for example, American ships are going to have to pay a 6-cent per ton fee upon entering port. Foreign vessels will have to pay a 50-cent per ton fee. And what this does is, of course, raises revenue. It makes domestic goods more attractive. And if you are going to purchase foreign goods, you'll have to pay. This is dangerous. You'll find later when you study the Great Depression and the things that led to the Great Depression, but tariffs can be dangerous because they can be reciprocated. So, which means that maybe your product won't sell in foreign markets because they've put a tariff on your products. But that's just something to think about. Economics is complicated. So, and basically a variety of goods are going to be taxed in this way. Okay, so let's look at who Hamilton is for a moment before we talk about more of his ideas. Again, you know a lot from the musical, but he was very American, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. He was a genius, self-made man, and he had had a tough childhood, all right? He was born out of wedlock, which means his parents weren't married. And so today these things don't matter as much to us, but back then they mattered because you wouldn't have a place in society, really, and people wouldn't want to associate with you necessarily. So he was born on a Caribbean island, so perhaps the stigma was a little bit less than if he were to have been born in England. He had a Scottish father, that's how he got the last name Hamilton, and he ran off when he was young, and at age 13 his mother died. Okay, we know that from the song. He did a lot of reading, and at age 17 he made his way to New York City with support of some friends and people who were interested in him, to King's College, where he then ultimately entered the Continental Army, gained Washington's notice, really became Washington's right-hand man. And we know that this causes some jealousy from others in the government. And we're going to see some of that play out in today's lecture. Hamilton became something that is known as a self-made aristocrat. And I know that that seems like an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms, because we know aristocrats, you tend to inherit your wealth, your name, your place in society. But it is as if Hamilton was born to success, yet at the same time he made the success himself. He lived almost like an aristocrat in America, though we know an aristocracy didn't really exist. But he was in the upper echelon, the best of the best, the aristoi of American society. But he was self-made. And that's very American because rags to riches, that's an American story of someone coming to this country or being born poor and being able to make a great deal of him or herself through hard work. So he became a thriving lawyer in New York City. He was a member of the Confederation Congress. Now, he got to see firsthand working with George Washington during the war, during the Articles of Confederation period. He and Washington both saw that it was very hard to wage a war without money and without real, effective, energetic leadership. And so these are the very things that the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists fought about, because the Anti-Federalists, we know, were terribly afraid of another tyranny, another monarch, fetus of monarchy, which, by the way, oh my goodness, your answers to that quote, some of them made me laugh and grossed me out a little bit. I'd ask fetus of monarchy, excuse me, and you'd say, I imagine an egg just been fertilized wearing a crown. And it's a little too literal for my taste, people. But yes, it's the idea that this is something that has the ability, the capability to grow into a monarchy. So that was a fear that the Anti-Federalists had. They were certainly afraid of that. And they were also afraid of a centralized government that had the power to tax. But what Hamilton and Washington saw firsthand is there wasn't effective leadership under the Articles of Confederation, and that there wasn't really an effective source of money for the war to be waged, and it nearly cost them the war. So Washington and Hamilton were of one mind here, and they saw this firsthand. These are not just philosophers. These are guys who have lived, they have lived it. Okay, so in my opinion, that means you can trust the way that they think. So, all right. Again, Hamilton is one of those who advocated for the new Constitution. He was a Federalist. He wrote on behalf of the new Constitution. He was ambitious, charismatic, brilliant, red-haired, if that indicates anything about one's personality. And I think you remember from Hamilton hearing that Martha Washington had named her feral cat after him because Hamilton was liked by the ladies. You know, young, handsome, had charisma. So, very good. Let's see. Again, Hamilton saw authority and money were needed for a nation to thrive. Also, something to notice. Hamilton looked to England as a model of the kind of civilization, the kind of economy that he thought America should develop. So let me explain what I mean by that. I'm sure you've heard of the Industrial Revolution, and this came really in two waves. The wave that came in the 18th century, so this is the era that we're talking about now, is when there's some machinery that can help in farming, when you suddenly have more industry, not yet mass production, but industry, more cities, the concept of people earning wealth off the farm, okay? So if you live on a farm, you make what you need to live. But the moment that you make money outside of that, you specialize, you have to depend on someone else to feed you, to make food to feed you. Obviously, you pay for it, but there becomes a dependency within society. And that is something that can be good or bad. It kind of depends on how you look at it. But Hamilton really wanted to see cities grow. He wanted to see the government incentivize. He wanted to see the government incentivize enterprise, people wanting to develop things, make things, have companies, have new ideas. He wanted to see that happen because that would lead to the nation's wealth. All right, so he looked to England as a model. All right, very good. Hamilton wanted to turn weak, disconnected states into a united economic powerhouse that would rival Great Britain. Okay, how again? Encouraging capitalism, free enterprise. Capitalism, here's a definition for you. Capital is whatever can help you create wealth. It can be your intellect. It can be your strength. You know, if you are very strong and can be a logger, haul lumber, things like that. Your intellect, if you can write. Your voice, if you're a singer. If you are a slaveholder, your capital, those are your slaves. If you own a business, your capital is your business. It's how you can make money. And capitalism is the idea that people make money and they keep the product or the wealth of their labor themselves. Okay, of course there are taxes and things. And then free enterprise is the ability to go and make a company or a business without needing some kind of license from the government, something of that nature. So Hamilton felt especially that Americans had that hustle, and that's all you can really call it, is hustle. Hustle, desire to make money, desire to create things, the ability to see a problem and fix it, to make something of oneself. And we know this would apply personally to Hamilton, but look at this nation too. That's hustle. You are scrappy if you overthrow a king. So he thought this would really suit this young country. All right, very good. So between January of 1790 and December of 1791, Hamilton wrote 2 reports on public credit. The first was dealing with the war debt. So the U.S. had 79 million. My dogs are barking. You'll have to ignore that if you hear it. I apologize. The U.S. had $79 million in debt that the state and federal government had incurred during war, or accrued is another word that you could say, had generated during war. France, Spain, and Holland had loaned the U.S. money. And so Congress also made more debt by printing paper money. Maybe not the best decision. So Congress required the new government under the Constitution to take responsibility for the debts created under the Articles of Confederation. Now, not everyone wanted to do that, but Hamilton in particular really believed that the people should pay off that debt because A, we all benefited from the war, and B, it's the right thing to do, right, to pay off your debt. C, gentlemen pay off their debts, and D, you build credit in the world if you pay off your debts. At some point in your life, you may have a credit card and you may be late on a payment and you get a letter and it's not fun. Or you get a letter that says you haven't paid your electric bill. We're going to turn off your electricity. It happens sometimes, right? That's life. But it affects something called your credit rating. And it affects your ability to take out loans to buy houses, to buy cars, maybe to get a loan to go to college and pay your tuition, things like that. And so, if you want to build credit in the world, if you want to be trusted, if you want the world to invest further in you, you have to pay off your debts. That's how Hamilton looked at it. So good. And Hamilton thought this debt should be paid by the central government. So whether Pennsylvania owed a debt or Virginia owed a debt, the national government should absorb all those and pay the debt in a unified way to show strength and unity. Because foreign powers shouldn't be making agreements or things with Pennsylvania, but dealing with the United States, right? Doesn't that make sense? So basically, there were 2 key recommendations that Hamilton had. One is war bonds that had lost value from the American Revolution could be exchanged for full value. The government would give you money. There's a problem with that though, okay? Farmers who had those war bonds and were in need of cash had sold them cheaply to speculators. Because think about it. You may think as a farmer, I'm never going to get full value for this. And here's this guy over here offering to pay me, if it's worth $50, he's going to pay me $20. I'll take it. I might never see anything. But now the government is saying, we will pay you that full value. Okay? And this is a problem because here we're going to see Hamilton and Madison begin to disagree. Hamilton says that the speculators are the ones who took the risk in buying those bonds from the farmers. They deserve to be reimbursed by the government. Madison says, hey, this isn't fair. Those farmers, they supported us during the war. They deserve what's theirs. This is a conflict. But understand this, capitalism requires risk. And so if every time someone comes in and takes a risk, a speculator in this case, you undermine them, they're never going to take risks anymore. So that's part of how wealth grows and is attained. So you can see what's just, but you can see Hamilton's argument too, I'm sure, right? Okay. And the second thing, again, the federal government will assume state debts. All right. Madison was also concerned about parts of Hamilton's proposal, the idea that the national government pay off the debts of all the states, and here's why. The North had more debt than the South. So think about that. As states, we maybe don't want to hear that Michigan is bankrupt. And so because Texas was careful and we paid off our debts and maybe we weren't greedy about something and didn't build that new state opera house, you know, I'm making stuff up here, that we don't owe that money, but we have more money in our treasury, so Michigan comes and knocking, share some of your money with us. We wouldn't like that, would we? This is going to create sectional conflict that is going to be, aside from the slavery issue, part of the problem leading toward the Civil War, because the South will feel bitter if they have to pay off a debt that wasn't theirs. You see, we understand how that works, right? So the plan, again, a compromise was reached to appease the South and get what Hamilton wanted, which was this kind of national paying off of the debt. Here's how the compromise was reached. The new capital was going to be moved to the Potomac River, which would become the District of Columbia. All right, that was the compromise of 1790. We know that the initial capital city is New York City. It's going to move to Philadelphia for 10 years, but then ultimately it's going to move to Washington, D.C. So there was kind of a trade-off here where Southern votes would support Hamilton's plan if the capital was moved. And so Hamilton's plan was a success. The new bonds issued by the federal government were bought up quickly by eager investors. And in 1794, the U.S. had the highest credit rating even of European nations. So credit rating, your parents can explain that to you as well, but it's the question of, are you a good risk to get a loan? So when you're buying a house, they look at your credit rating and they see whether you have a job, how much money you make, do you pay off your debts on time, things like that. And they give a credit rating. What kind of risk are you? Are you a good risk? Things like that. And it has to do with your interest rate in getting a loan. Because if you need money but you're a bad risk, they're going to make a higher interest rate that you'll have to pay back. Whereas if you're a good risk, your interest rate won't be as high. So, all right. It was obvious to foreign countries that the bonds were sound, the country is growing, it was a sure thing, and that America pays off its debts. that was enriching, and that gave people courage as well to invest in America. The U.S. economy also benefited from the French Revolution because America was exporting things to the French. This is not a French Revolution lecture. That would be fun, but not today. Let's see. Another reason there were some folks who didn't agree with Hamilton. We're going to see we have Madison, who's disagreed with him so far a bit. But his arrogance rubbed some people the wrong way. He had a high opinion of himself. And some might say his high opinion of himself was justified because he had the golden touch. But he knew it. You see what I mean? And he was Washington's number 2. And that rubbed some people the wrong way. Because think about it. There are more people than Hamilton in the president's cabinet. And yet it can begin to feel like, oh, it's the Hamilton show. And a large part of human history is ego, my sweet friends. It really is. Even how things work today. Ego. All right. So, let's see. Hamilton had, let's see. I think what I might do there is stop. We're at 26 minutes. And with the other things I have to tell you, maybe we'll have kind of two lectures that are a little under 30 for this week. So until next time, I bid you adieu, and we'll talk more about Hamilton and the banks next time. Adios.